Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, youth and education advocates are sounding the alarm about potential DC budget cuts. Those cuts could prove to be devastating for city youth. It comes as Mayor Muriel Bowser may have to make some really tough choices to close a monstrous spending gap as the city's budget remains in congressional limbo. My guests are weighing in on the impact those cuts could have on children, youth, and the families who are already struggling to make ends meet. We are hearing from the leadership of DC Action tonight. Kimberly Perry is the executive director. Rachel White is the deputy director for youth advocacy. Ladies, thank you so much for joining this conversation.
We're so pleased to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, thank you.
Let's share a few fast facts about young people in DC. 17% of children in DC live in poverty, with child poverty remaining disproportionately high for Black children, older children, and of course, those living east of the Anacostia River. The high school graduation rate in DC is lower than the national average. Chronic absenteeism, which is defined as those missing 20% or more of school days, remains a significant factor contributing to lower graduation rates. And of course, a 2024 report indicated that 60% of DC high school students were chronically absent. Before we talk about the money situation and the expected impact, I want you to share your assessment of where children and families in DC are to date. And I'll start with you, Kimberly. What are your thoughts on just where we are?
Well, you gave a nice snapshot of some of the challenges that we have when it comes to our young people. Let me share this with you. Maybe let's close our eyes and imagine what's possible for a minute. Because as you painted that very accurate picture of what the data tells us, Rachel and I every day get to work with young people, advocate alongside young people who have hopes and dreams, just like all the rest of us. And so when I think about some of that data, things like improvements that we've seen in the district around reading proficiency, for example, in elementary, and math proficiency in higher grades, our young people are actually doing better. And in particular, our young people of color are doing better. So just imagine for a minute, if we continue to make those investments early in our young people's lives, we are going to continue to see progress instead of the stagnated negative outcomes and the data that you just mentioned. So what I hope people take away is that if we continue to focus on our young people, if we continue to invest early and not interrupt those investments, we are going to see much better outcomes for our young people in the areas of education and health, and most importantly, economic security, and help and starting to close the racial wealth gap instead of continued conversations about child poverty.
Yeah, but the reality is that the district is in the middle of a money crisis, whether it is political or otherwise, and those improvements that you are talking about are taking into consideration that the money, the support, and the funding has been there, even though it hasn't always been the best kind of funding. There's always been a concern about that, but now there's an issue that could mean that there are cuts in many departments, including education and supporting those who are living, just above or at the poverty line.
Which is exactly the reason why we all, every DC resident, every advocate of any young person, needs to make sure that Mayor Bowser hears very clearly we cannot interrupt the investments we are making in our young people. It will have detrimental effects not only on individual young people, but the communities they live in and our city as a whole. And so, whether it's investing in uh, secure and safe housing, investing in positive youth development programs for our young people after school in the summertime and on school breaks, or investing in our young people's education very early in their lives, we really turned a corner 5 to 7 years ago in improving many of these investments. Now is not the time to interrupt them or disrupt them, because the outcome of that will be very negative for kids themselves, their families, and our city as a whole. So we
Rachel,
have to implore and make very clear to Mayor Bowser and every single member of the DC Council that these investments need to stay in place. Harold, I also just want to mention, as I said to you, many of us just left the Wilson Building. We had an advocacy day today. Nearly 100 parents, educators, and DC residents turned out to tell the DC Council that even in these tough budget times, even with congressional interference in our budget, we're talking nearly $1 billion less that we will have to budget. Even with that reality, we have to continue to keep investments for young people in place. Find other places to cut. Don't cut programs for children, youth, and families.
so let me ask you this, Rachel, and I do want to get back to Advocacy Day in just a bit, and I don't want to get ahead of things, but from your perspective, Rachel, what is it that you are seeing as you know, the director of youth advocacy for DC Action? When you see, the need, talk to me about some of the specifics.
Right. No, most definitely. Well, first, I want to just echo what Kim has said. I share the same sentiments. We have noticed a disinvestment in youth services across the district. You cannot cut youth programs and then be surprised when youth lack positive outlets, opportunity, or support, which is a direct consequence of disinvestment. When we see that young people, specifically the young people that I'm interacting with, don't have access to mental health supports, don't have access to safe housing or economic opportunities, it's not surprising that negative outcomes will occur, right? These are not specific behaviors or symptoms. These are root causes. We're not addressing the root causes to youth homelessness, lack of economic security. The district isn't doing that as a whole. So we're seeing that in increased episodes and heightened severity of mental health issues, and increased episodes of youth experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity in the district. In fact, the Urban Institute estimated in 2023 that 1 in 5 district youth were either homeless or housing insecure, which is roughly 10,000 young people in the district. So as Kim said, we know that cuts will be made, but we cannot make cuts to the safety net of our district, the safety net of youth, children, or the families that live here.
But those things didn't just happen this year. The lack of access, as you describe it, to adequate housing, mental health services, that's been a long-standing issue.
Absolutely correct. But because of the collective action advocacy that's been going on over the last decade, we've been able to get some improvements. So listen, a third of our kids in the city are living in concentrated poverty. It is no accident that the majority of the kids living in poverty are Black, or they're Latinx, they're Black and brown young people. This is because of the historical racism that exists in our country in not investing in Black and brown communities. And so that is the result that we have seen decade after decade, until advocates are saying, listen, we need to unpack these systems. Why aren't they working for our children? And so that's the kind of innovative community-based, inclusive, collective advocacy that's been going on for the last decade to change and reverse this trajectory. And so instead of chronically underfunding our communities and withholding investment in dollars, we're doing just the opposite. We're saying, no, we need consistent investment. Once you begin to make these investments, you have to continue them and you cannot interrupt them. And so that's why this trajectory is so important, because we are on a roll. Crime is coming down in the city over the last few years. And so again, if we want to continue to see outcomes like that, if we want to ensure our young people have more opportunities than fewer, then we have to continue the consistency of each of these investments. You can't invest for 5 years and then stop for 2 and expect the outcomes to continue. You've got to have that consistent investment over time.
I do want to talk a little bit about the advocacy, but I want our listeners to understand who you are, the organization, what it does. Kind of give me the cliff notes on what DC Action is and what is its charge.
Sure. We're a nonprofit, independent, community-based organization here in the District of Columbia. We focus on public policy and advocacy, which means that we are working to make sure that every child in the district grows up safe, resilient, powerful, and heard, and that the policies, investments, and programs that DC government invests in supports children and their families, and the institutions and organizations that families rely on every day. We do our work with an equity lens, as I mentioned before. Because of the history of this country, Black and Brown families have been disinvested in and underinvested in for far too long. And our work really focuses on closing those racial gaps and improving those outcomes for our Black and Brown young people. We also could never, ever do this work alone. We're a teeny tiny organization in the context of all the important work that really needs to get done. And so we rely on our partners, which are community-based organizations that serve families in the district. We work alongside young people and engage them in this fight and these discussions and this debate. They are a part of the policymaking process. And we also include families, parents, and educators in this work. The people who are experiencing the pain are the ones who get to be the architects of the solutions. And so that's the work that DC Action does on a daily basis. We are honored and lucky enough to be able to facilitate 3 citywide coalitions in this work that bring organizations and people to come learn about the issues and what it's going to take to make change. An early childhood coalition called Under 3 DC, an out of school time coalition, which is the DC Out of School Time Coalition, and our Youth Economic Justice Coalition that Rachel and her team lead for DC Action. So we work with more than 230 community-based organizations in the District of Columbia to really drive and move this work forward. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but Harold, to be honest, we're built for moments like this. We are here to resist. We're here to fight. We're here in the struggle with DC residents, and we're not going to stop because, again, we've gotten a taste of what some success looks like for our young people. And so we have to keep going, even in these tough times. We have to keep making the case, and we have to keep pushing our lawmakers and our leaders to make the right decisions on behalf of kids, to put their money where their mouth is.
I am going to take a break, but when we come back, Rachel, I do need to hear from you and in this conversation. And so when we come back, I want to hear from you. Also, I want to talk about Advocacy Day in just a bit. But don't forget, you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM, channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM, channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about possible DC budget cuts and the impact on youth in the city. My guests are Kimberly Perry, Executive Director for DC Action, and Rachel White, Deputy Director for Youth Advocacy, also with DC Action. I want to talk a little bit about your concerns, Rachel, about the impact of this $1.1 billion that the mayor is going to have to cut from the budget if Congress does not act and approve the Senate bill. Congress will not be back until Monday. There is no guarantee that Congress will act to restore that $1.1 billion. The mayor has already said late last week that this means no purchasing, no raises, no promotions, cuts possibly to public safety, cuts possibly to education. Everybody is going to be impacted. But from your specific perspective, what might you see if these cuts need to be made? How do you believe it's going to impact the young people that you serve in your capacity with DC Action?
Yes, thank you for that question. So one of the, what we know to be true is that the cuts will primarily impact like the Department of Human Services or the safety net of DC. And that directly impacts youth experiencing homelessness, which is my major focus in my portfolio of work. And so providers who provide housing, who provide drop-in services, supportive services for youth experiencing homelessness in the district rely on government funding, specifically from the Department of Human Services to run their programs. If there is a $1 billion cut, we anticipate there might be a cut to provider contracts who are currently providing services. So youth won't have the safety net that they need. They may not have housing. They may not have access to drop-in centers. They may not have access to clothing, shelter, childcare, things that are provided in the youth homelessness system. If there are cuts to the safety net. And I do want to highlight, so last Friday, DC Action, we released the State of Youth Homelessness for the District of Columbia, where we outline like the root causes and contributing factors of youth homelessness, specifically to DC, what the current system offers them, how the current system falls short, and some recommendations to improve outcomes and to ultimately end youth homelessness in the district overall. So
tell me a little bit more about what that report said. And the reason that I think it's really important, and we are really talking about staying relevant as it relates to some of the difficult current events, your report came out on the same day as we saw hours-long issues of disruptions at the Southeast waterfront with young people. There were, six teens who were arrested. Some have been charged with assaulting, a police officer. It was, mayhem. And I don't think that your report and these problems with young people are happening, outside of each other. There's a direct correlation.
Yes, there is a direct correlation. And so what we're seeing isn't a youth crime problem. I do want to highlight that it is a youth investment problem. Again, you cannot cut programs. You cannot be surprised if you do cut programs if they're that there's a direct consequence of misbehavior. If people don't have, young people specifically, don't have access to housing, access to mental health supports, access to economic opportunities that provide them with a livable wage to actually maintain and thrive in the district, like what do we expect? We have to address the root causes, and the root cause is chronic disinvestment. So you are absolutely right. They are definitely related in this sense. And so when we talk about like housing insecurity, one of the driving factors is poverty and economic insecurity, which we know is disaggregated by race in the district. 8 out of 10 youth in DC live in poverty, and they are Black. And so we have to address the root cause if we even plan to address crime in the city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely. Kimberly, you spoke about earlier today going to this advocacy action at the Wilson Building, and the dozens and dozens of supporters, parents, and the like. Talk to me about what happened today at the Wilson Building. Who did you talk to, and what was their response?
We were lucky enough to meet with every single council member's office, and the conversation was about the importance of preserving funding for young people and the programs that their families rely on. We focused a lot on early education and what might happen to our childcare system if investment goes away. If programs like early education, childcare, pre-K are cut in this budget, we're going to have parents that can't go to work. That's the bottom line. And if parents can't go to work, that has a direct impact on the income of their household. It has a direct impact on businesses, small businesses and large in this city, who rely on a workforce that can come to work every day, focus on the work ahead of them, and be productive employees.
So let me ask, so again, who did you talk to? I want to know, tell me what happened today.
Yeah. So we had nearly 100 advocates, professionals, parents, educators show up today to talk to every member of the DC Council. We started first with staff from those offices because council members were in a closed door session. But we started talking about if the city has to make $1 billion in cuts, don't cut programming for young people. Don't cut childcare and early education. I'll give you some examples. We started first with the meeting with the chairman's office and his staff, who said, talk to us about what's going to happen if childcare is cut. And we had program directors and owners of childcare facilities talk about they will no longer be able to serve families. They'll have to close their doors if funding for educators is cut, if funding for their programs are cut. And again, what that means is parents can't go to work. So then we also had parents there who spoke from personal experiences saying they're going to lose their jobs if they don't have a safe place for their children to go where they know they're being educated and well cared for. And that means that they're going to lose wages and lose income that their family relies on to pay rent, put groceries on the table, and to take care of all of their daily needs. So we could really be looking at a serious collapse of our childcare and early education system, which, Harold, as you know, translates to a collapse of our local economy. I mean, if we are already talking about a recession because of the layoffs in the federal workforce, if we have to cut programs like childcare, out of school time, and housing for our young people, I mean, that will cause a recession in itself because parents will not be able to go to work. They won't be able to take care of their basic needs.
Were you at, I know you said that they were in a closed door meeting, but at some point, did you have an opportunity to speak to any of the council members directly, or were they in the meeting the entire time?
We did. Once they finished their meeting, we had members come and talk to the group as a whole. So Council Member at Large Robert White joined us. Council member from Ward 3, Matthew Fruman, joined us. Council member Charles Allen from Ward 6 joined us, and several more. We did not get a glimpse of the chairman today, but we plan to follow up with him directly. But again, his office did a lot of great listening, agreed with us that these investments are important, and they pledged every single office. I want to be very clear about this. Every single office, all 13 members of the DC Council pledged to support, put their support behind continuing investments for our young people, particularly early education.
So the council members that you spoke to, what did they say?
They said they support early education and childcare. Many of them have young children themselves. That is what Councilmember Robert White shared today. He knows firsthand what it's like to feel vulnerable and rely on childcare, rely on those teachers who love, care for, and educate his two girls every single day, and the value that they bring. They allow him and his wife to go to work every day with a clear mind that their girls are safe, being cared for, and being educated. We heard that story over and over again from several council members who are parents themselves. Christina Henderson at large, Brianne Nadeau, Charles Allen, as I mentioned, Robert White, Wendell Felder actually joined us today, told compelling stories about his 2-year-old so he counts on childcare every day. Again, this is top of mind for our council members, and they know what will happen if we discontinue or disrupt these investments.
And that's the thing that I was going to bring up next. It is not as if they aren't acutely aware of the danger, and I don't think danger is overstating it. $1.1 billion is a lot of money.
A lot of money. Yeah.
It is a lot of money, and they are acutely aware of what that might mean. Did they talk about their concerns about the politics, or give you any indication of why they believe that this is happening?
There are a couple of things at play here. They're going to have some tough decisions to make, no doubt about it. We are advocating to protect and preserve funding for our young people and families and the organizations families rely on. There are a million other advocates also coming to them, making similar asks in similar areas. And at some point, when this budget season begins, sounds like the mayor may be releasing her budget maybe any day now or in the next several weeks. We're in a bit of a waiting period. But when that budget is released, the council's going to have to take a look and make some tough choices. There may be choices like, are we subsidizing a stadium or are we preserving our safety net, right? And so that's why our voices in the Wilson building are really important right now, because we need to be prioritizing our kids and families, our young people, and their futures. Again, we cannot have funding disruptions to any of these programs that our families are relying on.
Well, what about
they're gonna have really tough choices. I think they're trying to be real with us to say, like, we know the kind of choices we're gonna have to have. Remind us again why this is important. And so that's what we're there for. We've got to keep the heat on. We've got to keep the pressure on because the process is going to kick off here really soon, and they're going to have to make some tough decisions. And we really demand that they make choices that protect families and residents, not billionaires.
Well, what about that? I mean, you mentioned the stadium. The mayor made her most extensive, if not undetailed, statements yesterday about that and addressing the economics that have presented themselves to the district. Do you think that could help or hurt?
We also talked economics today because childcare, out of school time, and housing for our young people is also about economics, right? And so we don't think it is one over the other. What we know for sure is that billionaires don't need subsidies. Our kids and families are the ones that need our tax dollars, not
Mhm.
billionaires. And so we want to continue to make that point. We all love our sports. We love our DC teams, but billionaires can build their own stadiums. Our tax dollars don't need to subsidize their stadiums. They can pay for it on their own. What we want our tax dollars to go to is to support our kids and families.
Rachel, I want to
Oh, sorry.
bring you back into this conversation because I think one of the things that Kimberly said that I think is really poignant, everyone needs support. And as you mentioned, as Kimberly mentioned, there are advocates for everyone. And one organization or one group of muscular advocates are no less important than than the next. And we've seen the police union talking about concerns about public safety, and the fire department and DC public schools, and everything else. How do you fight for the people that you are supporting, knowing that other organizations, other agencies, other advocates are just as concerned about the people that they are supporting? I mean, how do you elbow your way in, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a really important question, and I want to know the role isn't to like pit one systemically oppressed group against another. Ideally, all the needs for all folks who need it the most will raise to the top. I'm not trying to say that youth homelessness is more important than youth who are incarcerated or their issues don't matter. We can't afford cuts across any safety net, any programs, any services that impact youth. And so that is the argument that I take. And then we know, but specifically for youth experiencing homelessness, it's a silent crisis. We have to continue to elevate the issue, even to council members. Like if you don't see it on the street, you may not think about it. So we have to continue to highlight that these are youth who are full of potential, dreams, aspirations, but due to circumstances beyond their control, they find themselves without stable housing. They find themselves not connected to resources. We have to also know that if we don't invest now in youth experiencing homelessness, youth are going to become the adults who are experiencing homelessness, the families that are experiencing homelessness. And then we pitch it in, this is a cost savings to the District of Columbia. If you invest now, then you don't have to, it may offset the costs to future mental health intervention, future crime dollars. So we have to frame it in, this saves money, but we're not trying to pit like issues against each other. What's important is that all the needs of all youth in the district are being met. It's the responsibility of our district.
So let me ask you something, because it struck me just now that if a young person is experiencing homelessness, then they can't learn. Or as we've known, empty bellies, children that are hungry, also can't learn. And all of the other social ills that kind of come with that. And so if they're homeless, if they are hungry, and if they aren't learning, then they are at a point of survival, which again impacts issues about public safety. All of this is connected, Rachel.
Yes, everything is connected, and that's why it's important that while we focus on like securing housing, we have to take a holistic approach as well. We have, because it's interconnected, it's intersectional. We have to focus on mental health, career readiness, education, because as you said, youth who are experiencing homelessness are more susceptible to low educational outcomes, low economic outcomes, more likely again to be impacted by generational poverty or become homeless adults, or experience chronic homelessness. So we have to invest in education resources, mental health supports, careers, again, that result in a livable wage, and that from a holistic point of view to truly improve outcomes, which will improve outcomes for the district overall.
So help me also with this, because I'm kind of trying to get a full understanding. When most people talk about people who are experiencing homelessness, you often, let's say families, for example, and providing shelter. Okay. And the mayor has said that she wasn't going to cut back on resources to the homeless. But when you specifically talk about homeless youth, and forgive my naivete, because I do not know, are these young people who don't have access to familial support, to moms, dads? Are they just out there by themselves? And if they are, where do they go when advocates and others are trying to help them? Do you understand what I'm asking? I guess we know where the shelters are for for the men. We know where the shelters are for the families. But what about the shelters for a 13-year-old boy?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Right.
a 14? Help me with that.
Yes, no, for sure. So first, I want to point out that the mayor did say that she wasn't going to cut funding for
Mm-hmm.
shelters, but that does not mean no cuts to services. So while the
Right.
building may exist, the services may not exist, right? So I do
Okay.
want to highlight that. And so youth experiencing homelessness can range. Youth can be accompanied with their parents and live with their parents, like in a family shelter, but a large chunk of youth experiencing homelessness are unaccompanied by a parent or guardian. And then when
Right.
we refer to youth, we're not just talking about minors. Youth is defined up to 24 in the youth homelessness system. So they are either in an emergency shelter, they're a drop-in center receiving services. In some drop-in centers, you may stay a night or two. Transitional housing is an option as well. Rapid rehousing for youth is an option. So there's different housing types for unaccompanied youth that are experiencing homelessness, but the current how the current landscape is, we're still not meeting the needs of youth experiencing homelessness. There are a little over like 700 beds for youth experiencing homelessness in the district, but as I stated, the Urban Institute study indicated that there are almost 10,000 youth experiencing housing insecurity, right? And then we do like point in time counts in the district where we count for 1 week the number of youth that we can find who are experiencing homelessness by like looking at different the HMIS, or the Homeless Management Information System, to try to locate youth that are experiencing homelessness. But we know that the number that we have does not capture the full scope, because all youth are not identifying. Some youth may not even know that they're experiencing homelessness. If you're couch surfing or living
Mm-hmm.
doubled up in a house, even with family, but you don't have like an adequate place to sleep at night, you are experiencing housing instability. And so, yeah, it's a silent crisis. If people may think of homelessness and say, well, I don't see young people on the streets, or 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds on the streets, but that's not how it works in practice.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was trying to understand. And for those who are listening who do not understand what happens to young people, and again, I'm not talking about young adults. I'm talking about minors. What happens to a minor who may not have the support of parents, who may be couch surfing or not couch surfing? If you're a 15-year-old boy without supportive parents, where do they go?
Right. So the youth homelessness system does serve minors who are under the age of 18. There are very minimal resources for youth specifically in the youth homelessness system, but they do exist. We have resources for expecting and parenting minors, as well as LGBTQ minors as well, to receive housing supports who are not accompanied by their parents or guardian. And it is important to know, because this often comes up, well, what about the Child Welfare Agency or CFSA? Like those youth, maybe that system can take care of those youth. But if there is no allegation of abuse or neglect, the mandated reporters, even at the youth homelessness sites, they don't have to report it to CFSA if there is no allegation of abuse and neglect. Some youth leave home or are forced to leave home if they're not accepted by their parents, be it LGBTQ status, or if you are expecting or parenting, or if there's just family conflict. Those are some of the driving factors of why youth leave the home, but it doesn't necessarily amount to neglect, and which is why those youth aren't necessarily in the child welfare system.
I only have about 2 minutes left, and Kimberly, I'll let you have the last word. Short of Congress deciding to vote in favor of this Senate bill and restoring that $1.1 billion, what, and you said your organization is built for this, but many families are not. So what are the next best steps in the worst case scenario from your perspective?
Right now, while we're in a waiting period, Harold, you know that the House of Representatives went home without addressing the DC issue. They returned from recess on April 28th. There's still an opportunity for them to do the right thing and to pass a clean fix to this, the exact same bill that the Senate passed. So they can still take action, and it would still make a tremendous difference in our budget. That's number one. People often say, well, the District of Columbia doesn't have representation in the Senate. We have a non-voting delegate in the House. Well, because we have DC Home Rule and because Congress refuses to make us a state, that means every member is our member. So DC residents and others, our friends in Maryland and Virginia and beyond, can call their members. So any member in the House needs to hear about this issue so that they can come back from that recess and fix and pass that bill to fix this budget issue. Second, we still have slow revenues growing in the District of Columbia, which is making our FY26 budget a challenge as well, and that there could still be another $1 billion shortfall there. And so we need DC residents. Now is the time, while we're in waiting, to call their member of the council, to call the at-large members, call Mayor Bowser herself, and make the point that we cannot make cuts to programs and investments that kids and families rely on, and that we do not need to subsidize billionaires at a time when revenues are short. In these tough economic times, again, we cannot subsidize billionaires. We need to take care of our own. And so taxpayer dollars need to go to support DC residents.
Kimberly Perry, Rachel White with DC Action. Thank you both so very, very much. We will be in touch, and continued good luck with your advocacy.
Thank you so much for having us, Harold.
Thank you so much.
Sure thing. That is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, April 22nd. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.